almost Sequoia I saw on a list today. Is anyone in here from the Sequoia list that might have had some insight on? I think it was Beyond the Bright Sea. I also want to welcome Lexanne Seifert, who is a permabound rep in the Dallas area.
Yay!
She's been doing Zooms on Wednesdays. Sheila, how did that Zoom go on Wednesday? Sheila Hennessy is the, I still don't know your title except just awesome person from Penguin. What is?
That is
Education sales manager is my role. I basically sell books to permabound and other educational wholesalers. And so I'm a little bit, a teeny tiny cog in the works that get your books into the school and into the school libraries and into the classroom.
So you do some pitching to the different entities, the bookstores, the educational companies.
Yeah, educational companies now solo. I don't do any indie bookstores anymore.
We'd love to hear about the
pure
Zoom.
education.
We'd love to hear about the Zoom you did yesterday with Lexanne. Maybe Lexanne, or you could mention that. Texas, Lexanne's been doing them on Wednesdays. Not yesterday, but the Wednesday was really good, wasn't it?
Wednesday.
We did, yeah. We had it. We always have a great time. We typically do it with our. I'm in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, so we do it with those customers. And we had Jess Nuanez yesterday, who has just published Birdie and Me, which is just, I see Jessica, thumbs up. It's the most beautiful book for our middle grade readers about family.
Oh, very nice, Jessica.
So if you get so Brown Brothers, if you get an opportunity to have Jess, she's great.
Okay.
And I think the book is very special.
It's definitely on my read list. This is Margaret Resendez. I'm one of Lexanne's friends from Dallas, Arlington area, actually, and it was great. Very authentic voice. It's definitely
right, and I think
my list.
I think what we ended up talking about mostly yesterday were the students that we have and that we serve who live in these unconventional families, and the all of the issues that they see adults dealing with that are out of the control of kids. And they see adults really struggling with difficult family relationships for a variety of reasons, but it definitely tells that type of story through the lens of this very protective sister of her little brother, who just happens to be this non-conforming gender kid. So I hope the book does not gain the reputation of being, that kind of transgender book, because it's not that. It's really more about the family and acceptance. I think is the word that keeps coming to my mind. It's just about healing and it. So anyway, I think Sheila can hook you guys up, right, Sheila?
Okay, well, we've got a lot of people here, a lot of people watching on YouTube. We're going to go ahead and get started a couple of minutes early. Again, we want to welcome everybody, and there's still more people that'll be joining us. And I'm going to introduce them all right now in order, and then we'll get started with Polly Farquhar. Our first speaker today, our first author guest, is Polly Farquhar. And then after her, I believe Sarah Caput will be going second. Kier Graff will be going third today. Jessica Kim will be our fourth speaker, and then Lauren Wolf will be our last but not least. And so, again, we have a great mix of new authors and successful, longtime authors, and this is just going to be so exciting. This is sponsored by Penguin Young Readers, set up by Sheila Hennessy. There's Sheila Hennessy, who is with Penguin.
Thank you.
We're so excited to have everybody here and our guests, and we're very thankful. So we're going to start by introducing Polly Farquhar. She's from Ohio. She's written a book called Itch. This is her first novel, which has already gotten several accolades, starred reviews, comparisons to Fish in a Tree and See You in the Cosmos. I know y'all have those books. And we're going to start speaking with her. Hello, Polly.
Hi, how are you? I guess I already know that. Sorry.
Hi, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Well, yeah, it's fun reading about your book. I haven't read it yet, but Itch has a lot of connections to your life, your real life,
Yeah.
things that you've experienced and your daughters have. So we're really excited to hear about it and hear about maybe how the book would, what kids would really love it when we get back to school in the fall.
Okay. And so I just do screen share for PowerPoint.
Yes, that'd be great.
Let's see if I get this right. So thank you all so much for having me. I was so glad to add something to my schedule instead of taking it away, which I've been doing since March. And it's really interesting to me that I'm talking to you folks in Oklahoma because, believe it or not, although the book takes place in Ohio, I thought about Oklahoma more than you might think, because you cannot just Google OSU football and find Ohio State. So it was Oklahoma State and Oregon State. And so I learned I had to be much better at my Google results. So I can't tell you how many times I went looking for something. I said, wait a minute, this is Oklahoma football. That wasn't what I was looking for. So my name's Polly Farquhar. This is my debut middle grade novel, Itch. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm going to read from it, the book, for about, I think it's about 4 minutes. I timed myself. I'm supposed to be timing myself now, so I don't talk too much. And then I have some, maybe some connections for teachers to think about in the classroom. I've been a writer my whole life. I had the Richard Scarry books when I was a kid, and I don't know what it was. There are all those cats and dogs. There was a bulldog editor, a cat poet, a cat children's book writer. I looked at those books, those characters, when I was a kid, and I looked at those cats and dogs, and I thought, that's me. The writer part, not the bulldog part. And so I always took myself pretty seriously as a writer. I probably was insufferable, but I had a pretty academic path. I was an English major, got a Master of Fine Arts. I taught college English for about 10 years, everything from freshman composition to I directed some senior seminar papers, and I wrote literary adult short stories. And I didn't think about children's literature again till I had kids of my own. I have 2 daughters. They're just a little less than 2 years apart. And going to library story time was absolutely the highlight of my week. I don't know if it was the highlight of their week. They loved it. But for me to get 2 little kids to the library was a big and very exciting deal. And it just changed what I read and what I thought about writing. I would look around in the children's section and see the board books, the picture books, the chapter books, the middle grade novels. And when they're good things for kids, and for my kids, it makes me like tear up and everything. So I just was so moved. I couldn't believe, like, look at all these books people have written for kids. So that was kind of the start of it. And then the other thing was, one of the picture books I read to my kids was Owl Moon by Jane Yolen. And I was just gobsmacked. It's not just a good picture book. It's a good story. It's good writing, period, for anybody. I don't care who you are. And that was the moment where I thought, I want to write for children. This is amazing. I wish that it occurred to me 10 or 15 years earlier, but that's okay. That's the way it worked out. And once I reached that point, I knew if I was going to write a middle grade novel, I did want to write about kids with food allergies. Both my children have serious food allergies. Between the 2 of them, we have 5 food allergies, one of which is a food group, and the other one doesn't even have to be listed on a food label, which is sesame. So we don't go anywhere without 2 epinephrine auto-injectors per kid. And that could be EpiPens, Auvi-Qs, Adrenaclick, just whatever the insurance gods let us have that year. That's what we take. And if you're teaching, you're in a school, I'm sure you have every year a handful of kids in your class with food allergies. The CDC says that 8% of school kids have food allergies. And depending on your class size, that's supposed to work out to about 2 kids per classroom. So I have 2 characters in the book that have food allergies. The main character's best friend, and then there's another character. And then since I was going to write about what it was like to have food allergies, and it's not the main thrust of the book, but it's part of the book. I knew I had to kind of go for it and write about my own stuff, which is my own, I guess, invisible condition, as sometimes people call it, which is idiopathic angioedema, which is itching and swelling of unknown origin. It's not quite the same thing as a food allergy, but I'll get hives. If I itch them, I swell up. The first time that happened, my hands were so swollen, I'm revealing my age, but I could not manage a rotary dial phone to call my mother because I just kept itching. I didn't know what was happening. And then, surprise, I was very swollen. So I just kind of went for it. I thought I might as well. If I'm writing about my kids, I'm going to write about me too. Here's kind of some ideas here from the book. So Itch is about a kid whose name is Isaac. He's trying to find his way in a new place, which is Ohio. I've lived in Ohio almost as long as I was born and raised in upstate rural New York. So he's trying to find his way in a new place with all its football hype, for example, and with his condition that makes him itchy, gives him hives, makes him swell up, takes over his body. And in the opening chapter of the book, he and his friends end up sort of outrunning a tornado on their bikes. You can see how that works. And that tornado destroys part of the school cafeteria, which changes how things work in the school, particularly lunches. His mom, who is an engineer, who's a real stickler for detail, the one who helps him out with the math, the one who's on top of everything, has left for an extended business trip in China. So we've got that going on. And everybody but Isaac's best friend, Sydney, calls him Itch when all he wants to do is be a regular kid. And then one day, one of his classmates asks him to steal a pheasant from the pheasant farm where he works. Hence the picture there of the pheasant. Which is something that Isaac would normally never do, but then one day it feels like it's his only option. And I asked my older daughter what my book was about, and she said friendship, and I thought that was just a really great answer. Isaac is trying to maintain his friendships. He's trying to be a good friend to Sydney, and then he's also finding some unexpected friendships. I'm going to try to remember to breathe now, and I'm going to read for, I think I timed it, it's worked out to be about 4 minutes. So I'm going to read a little bit from the first chapter, and then I have some slides that show, to my mind at least, ways that itch could be used in the classroom. The day the tornado came through, Sydney, Nate, and I were out riding our bikes together, burning down the banks of the river and then splashing into the water. The river was wide, slow, and muddy. The grass in the yards had turned a crunchy kind of yellow, and the corn in the field that stood between us and the gas station was taller than even Nate. It was August. School started next week, 6th grade. Up at the top of the riverbank, Sydney rocked back and forth on her bike. Ready? Nate already stood in the river with his bike, the water up to the middle of the wheels. The water was low because it had been dry, which was good because when there was a lot of rain, the river turned green and stuff grew on it. From farm runoff, my dad said. Nate yelled, "Go, go, go." Sydney skidded down the steep bank, the closest thing to a hill around here, fighting with her handlebars as she tried to keep control through the mud. Her bike sent up a big spray as it hit the shallow water, and she shrieked. I followed her down, and mud splattered all the way up my face, and then the splash of water soaked my shirt. The day was the kind of hot that felt like it was sitting on you. The water wasn't much cooler, but at least it was wet. I didn't even think about itching. As we hauled our bikes up to go again, Sydney said, "I can't believe school starts next week." Me neither, I said. At least football is starting up, Nate said. He chucked a clump of mud at me, but it went wide and splattered on Sydney's arm. The handful of mud I threw at Nate missed him completely. Sydney laughed. You guys will never play ball with arms like that. Watch me, Nate said, and he hit my leg on his next throw. It had been a good summer. Sydney lived down the street from me, and we'd been friends since I first moved to Ohio. We hung out a lot, riding bikes on the riverbank, playing video games and then cards on the front porch when her parents kicked us out of the house, striking at her brothers with water balloons when they were doing yard work. Usually it was just the two of us. Then Nate started showing up with his bike at the river. And sometimes when I was hanging out with Nate, we hung out with the other guys from school. Nate popped up the front wheel of his bike, tipping his head back to look at the sky, which was as dark as a bruise. Let's go get slushies before it rains. At the gas station, we tracked in mud. We're swamp creatures, Sydney said. She pushed back her hair with her muddy arm. It was coming out of her braid and all fuzzed around her face. There weren't any cars at the gas pumps. The day the tornado came through was also the first day of the Buckeye football preseason, and the store was empty. Shoot, Sydney said, heading to the counter. The slushie machine is broken. She looked at the guy at the cash register. For real? That's all I want. That's all I want in the whole world, a slushie. There's ice cream in the back freezer. I only do the slushies. Thanks anyway. I asked the guy if there had been any weather alerts, but he said he'd only been listening to the game. Buckeyes up by 14 already, he told us. That's how it is in Ohio. Everybody is always talking Ohio State University football. It's going to be a blowout, Nate said, cracking his knuckles. And I guess Nate knew the guy because they started talking about the game and then Nate's grandparents. Excuse me, I said, butting in, but are you sure there isn't even a watch out or a thunderstorm warning? All spring there had been tornadoes, the kind that busted out of the sky in the middle of the night. Invisible demons in the dark, roaring as they came to eat you, your house, your town. It got so bad everywhere that my grandmother, who lived in another state, followed our weather. Sometimes she called us before our town's tornado sirens even went off. She called if it was the middle of the night. The weather was so bad that no one minded. The wail of tornado sirens is hard to hear when you're inside a house, asleep, with the air conditioner running. Maybe, the guy said. Sorry about the slushies. Nate said, we can find something at my grandmother's. We rode our bikes farther down the empty roads to Nate's grandmother's storage units, the storage U, and she had popsicles in the freezer in her office. They were the kind in plastic tubes that you freeze at home. Sydney read the ingredients on the box. Big blue clouds rolled in, fat and heavy. It felt like before. We ate fast. The storage U was 3 long lines of cinder block buildings with red metal doors and 3 long gravel driveways. The office was a trailer near the road. Nate's grandmother was working inside. After a while, she banged on the window and waved us away, and I shoved the empty popsicle wrapper into my pocket and climbed on my bike. Go Bucks! Nate, his teeth still around the plastic tube, peeled off toward his house with a wave, but I lived farther on, and Sydney a block beyond me. It was hot and soupy, but the wind that pushed in was cold. Once Sydney and I made it to our street, it took us 3 minutes to get to my house. I knew that because the tornado sirens started to wail, and they wail solid for 3 minutes before turning off and then starting up again. The sirens are loud, piercing. The sound goes right through your body and down into your soul and rattles your earwax. So that was some of the first chapter. And then in terms of how to use this with your students in your classes, to my mind, some themes and issues in the book: friendship, fitting in, being an outsider, being true to oneself, self versus self, self versus society. My daughter tells me they say character versus self, so however it should be phrased. Issues, invisible conditions, food allergies, empathy, peer pressure, doing the right thing, kind of recognizing what is the right thing, because sometimes what you think is the right thing maybe isn't the right thing. There are some resources for educators. I have some on my website. My website is pollyfarquharauthor.com. You can say that 3 times fast. I have a page there, Common Core activities that I put up right when we kind of went to quarantine, just hoping if people were looking for things. I focus there on setting and point of view, and then there's some creative writing prompts, because how could I not include some creative writing prompts? When I wrote those, I geared them for 5th and 6th graders. And I do have, if Common Core is important to you, if you need all the numbers, I have included those. There's also an educator's guide from the publisher on holidayhouse.com. There's a couple different ways to get to it. Right on the Holiday House website, there's a tab for librarians and teachers. And then through that, you get to downloadable materials and you can go to itch. I think also if you're on the actual page for the book, it's way down at the bottom. That's a PDF file. And then some areas that I thought itch aligned with your state critical reading and writing standards. These were the ones that kind of occurred to me. Point of view, which I guess I mentioned earlier, was something I focused on when I thought about what students can do. As you heard, it's told first person from Isaac's point of view. It's not from the point of view of the kids with food allergies. It's not from the point of view of the boy who asks Isaac to steal a pheasant. And of course that makes a difference. Considering different literary elements, I think the setting is a key one, that it takes place in a rural setting. Isaac rides his bike to his job at the pheasant farm. I don't know if Ohio matters as much to people, and I don't want you to think it's all Buckeye football at all, but there's certainly that kind of cultural piece in the book. And there's stuff like protagonist, antagonist with characters. My kids, both of my children this week in their distance learning, had a whole bunch of worksheets about metaphors, similes, hyperbole, idiom. I didn't put that on the list, but I will say I have a smarty pants character in here who has a gimme because he says something and he says, "What? It's hyperbole." And I didn't even know it was going to match up with the standards. It was just something I thought this kid might say. And I guess that's all I got. I'm ready for questions if anybody has any. And thank you.
Well, it sounds amazing. And everyone who's just joined us, we've been speaking with Polly Farquhar. We have a few more minutes with her. She's the author of Itch, which is published by Holiday House. We're very glad she's here. Of course, everybody, Lexanne, who's a Permabound rep, she saw, I don't know if you've looked in the chat, but I think she's opening up like 8 brand new schools this summer in Dallas. And she put a note on the chat saying that your book was in every single list for the opening day collection. That's how good
that's awesome. Thank you.
It is. So again, very popular book. Everybody here is probably excited because of the tornado aspect.
Yeah.
But what I like about books like these is I just, I hate bullying and I hate it when kids feel alone. And so I feel like books like this are just so important to, let the kids who aren't going through that maybe understand more, that awareness that maybe they'll treat their classmates nicer. Is that kind of what they're going to get out of this?
I think so. And I think something else that is important to me is that the bully he's not a cut and dry bad guy. He wants the pheasant, not because he's a bad kid. That's what he wants. And he kind of gets into some of this, but he's and he is, absolutely exerting peer pressure. And maybe it is a little bit of a bully, but I don't know how to explain it. He's coming at it. He's from a genuine want of his. It's not like just clear cut, I'm a big meanie and I'm going to take your lunch money. So it's to me, it's just a little bit more complicated.
Anybody else have a question? I've got a couple left. We have about 2 minutes left with Polly.
Well, I think that this would relate to Oklahoma kids on so many different levels: football, tornadoes, the rural setting, all of that would relate to our kids as readers. So it'll be easy to find a connection for them to want to read that book.
Great, thank you.
Would you say 4th grade is too young, or would you say?
I would not necessarily, I don't think I would say that. I suppose it depends a little bit on the reader. I wouldn't say it's too young. I focused on 5th and 6th grade because that just kind of seemed like the middle of the age range. So.
Okay, well, I just have one quick question. Publishing process, the first time. I mean, what was it like when you found out that your book had been accepted, and then to hear all the praise it's getting? Just in a few words, how'd you feel about that?
Okay, well, I felt great. It was wonderful. It was a long process. There was a lot of revision and revision. And I kind of got to a point and I thought, well, if this never happens, I don't even know what a book is. And then when things happen, it's kind of hard to believe. And I feel a little disassociated from it. And now that we're all in quarantine, it's been kind of probably good in this regard only, good for my mental health, because I'm not like looking in libraries or looking in bookstores. It's just out there. It's in the world. I can't do much about it. It's just existing and I'm not keeping score. So I hope that made sense.
Yes. Holly Farquhar. Kyle, do you mind putting up her screen one more time? And we're going to give away. Penguin told me today that they have one arc of Itch that they're going to send to me. And whoever has a birthday the closest to February 4th, which is when Itch came out. If you want to type your birthday in the chat, if it's close to February 4th, and then we will move along. Thank you again, Polly, so much
Thank you.
for being here today and sharing Itch with us. And while we wait for that, I will go ahead and introduce our next guest. Our next guest is Sarah Caput. She is from Washington. She is the author of Get a Grip, Vivi Cohen, which is her first novel, and wow, it already has a bunch of star reviews and lots of things. And again, autism awareness and the autism community is very near and dear to her heart, and that's one of the topics of this book. So another great book for awareness for kids. Get a Grip, Vivi Cohen. Welcome, Sarah Caput.
Hi, thank you for having me. So this is my book, Get a Grip, Vivi Cohen. And in case you're wondering, you might have gone, that's my cat, Allie. He's a little dependent on me, so he might be joining us for some of this. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to talk about the book. So my book is a novel in letters about an autistic girl pursuing her dream to be a knuckleball pitcher. As children, many of us write letters to our favorite athletes, writers, and movie stars. We know that we probably won't receive anything back, except maybe a form letter and a publicity photo. Yet we still fantasize about going to the mailbox, finding a real letter with a personalized greeting and answers to all of our most pressing questions. This dream becomes real for Vivi Cohen when her favorite baseball player, knuckleball pitcher VJ Capello, responds to her fan mail. Their friendship and correspondence form the backbone of Get a Grip, Vivi Cohen. Like many autistic people, myself included, Vivi finds it easier to communicate by writing as compared to speaking. Writing letters to VJ is a way for her to share the emotions that are just too hard to say out loud. And at this moment in her life, she has a lot of emotions to express. Much to her excitement, she's playing baseball on a team for the first time. But being the only girl and only autistic person on the team might be even tougher than finding the strike zone. Get a Grip, Vivi Cohen is my love letter to baseball and to the knuckleball, the game's quirkiest pitch. A knuckleball is a physics-defying pitch, which they say takes 10 minutes to learn and a lifetime to truly master. And to me, when I heard that, that felt like an apt metaphor for basically learning how to exist in this world and for learning how to grow up. As I first began to write, I had to think about what kind of a girl would spend years trying to master a near impossible pitch. I knew that this girl would be completely dedicated to her craft, willing to put hours in her life into practice without any assurance that she'd ever get to play in a big game. I figured she would be more than a little stubborn, and tough enough to endure scorn from boys who don't want a girl on their team. Vivi is that kind of girl. My book is also a tribute to feminism and the neurodiversity movements. If you're not familiar, the basic idea behind neurodiversity is that autistic people and others with neurological disabilities and differences are not inherently defective. Rather, autistic people like Vivi should be embraced for who they are and given the accommodations and tools they need to succeed in the world. Vivi's story is about one girl's experience as an autistic person, but it is also a story about family, teamwork, and self-discovery. If readers take away one thing from her story, I hope it's that autistic experiences are ultimately human experiences. And so just to say a little brief word about autistic representation. I did write this book in large part because I was disappointed with the state of autistic representation in literature. I think too often stereotypes have appeared in literature. The hyperlogical autistic scientist, the sibling who is a burden, the person who cannot understand love. And I wanted to write a character who felt authentic. It was also important to me that she be a girl. Vivi's experiences are somewhat unique to autistic girls because oftentimes autistic girls are pressured to fit in with their peers by adapting traditional gender roles in a very narrow sense. So for a girl like Vivi who wants to play baseball, this causes conflict. She wants to follow her own path, but sometimes the people in her life, including her mom, aren't sure that doing that will be for her own good. And so this is about her learning how to navigate these complex situations and figure out how to advocate for herself. The book is dedicated to all neurodiversity advocates, past, present, and future. And it was important for me to do this to signify the importance of the movement in my work. Because neurodiversity, in case you don't know, is a political movement that I've been involved with for some time. And it is central to the book, even if it doesn't quite appear in those terms. And because Vivi isn't familiar with the term, but her journey embodies the idea. She has to learn that, yes, she's capable and talented and valuable just as she is. So I think this book could hopefully appeal to a number of different readers. If you're familiar with Jason Reynolds' wonderful Ghost series, I think this book has some similarities because the thing I love about those books is that they're about sports, but they're not about sports. And that's how I've always seen Vivi, that it is, yes, a baseball story, but it's really also a story about a character finding her way in the world and learning how to grow up in a way that's true to herself. And I think that athletes and people who kids who like sports stories, I think can relate to that hopefully. And also because it's an epistolary book, I think kids who like that kind of format, like classics like Dear Mr. Henshaw, or more recently, books like Breakout or See You in the Cosmos, kind of unconventional format would also, I think, like that. And also, of course, books about it fits into books about disability and difference. I think books like Wonder, Rain, Rain, Planet Earth is Blue, and I do see Vivi as being somewhat more light in tone in some of those books, which can be pretty sad. I love Planet Earth is Blue, but it makes me cry, and I think this book is maybe a little bit on the lighter side, but does deal with the different themes. There are also numerous ways to incorporate the book into the curriculum. Since the book is an epistolary novel, I think it's a great way to prompt kids to do a letter writing exercise. And I think that a lot of kids maybe get intimidated by the idea of writing an essay. Perhaps writing a letter is a little bit more accessible, even though it really is the same muscles. So it's for anything that practicing writing is, of course, always great, I think. And so I've been actually working with a few other authors, including Kelly Jones, author of Unusual Chickens for the Exceptional Poultry Farmer, and Veera Hiranandani, author of The Night Diary, a wonderful book, to present a series of epistolary exercises. You can find the information on my website, sarahcapit.com. If you go into the Educators tab, you can find out all about this. Basically, my exercise is asking kids to do what Vivi did. Pick a hero, a personal hero of theirs. It could be a celebrity, an athlete like Vivi chose, but it could be a friend, a family member, a teacher. Really write a letter to that person, kind of explaining why they're their hero and how that person has guided their life. And so hopefully, I think that can really, is something that is easy for kids to do because it's, I think, something that a lot of them have probably thought about or can think about easily, but it also, I think, kind of ticks those boxes of what they need to learn in language arts. Hi, Allie, about kind of using supporting evidence and using examples and all of those wonderful writing things. I also think it has a great tie into PE class and sports because it really deals, I think, with themes of teamwork and sportsmanship. That a big theme throughout is, well, what does it mean to be a good teammate? That we see with Vivi and VJ and some of her friends, a wide range of teammates, ranging from the good to the not so good. The book also deals with what it really means to win. And I know with sports books, we can be so focused on winning. And but this book, in some ways, I wanted to kind of deal with that in a more complex way. That it's not for Vivi. It's not just about winning. It's about getting the opportunity to play. It's about the relationship she builds along the way. And so I think this can hopefully, with kids who have their own experiences with sports, hopefully can provide them with a kind of a sense of kind of the issues that they're facing. And I also think that the book can be incorporated into any autism awareness activities and disability content that you might have in your schools. I know April is Autism Awareness Month, which many autistic people have rebranded as Autism Acceptance Month. And I think, I know for some kids, kind of looking at a list of kind of quote unquote symptoms might be a little abstract, but I would hope that reading a book might kind of bring the issue to light to them in a different way, and to realize that yes, kids like Vivi are different from them, but they're also not so different in some ways. And I hope that that can build empathy. And for kids who are autistic themselves, hopefully relate to her, even though, like I said, she's just one character. And so obviously there's that issue, but I hope that it can maybe bring something to the April autism awareness issues. If anyone here is a librarian or educator, I'd be happy to do a Zoom session with any of you or to talk to your students. I would love to do that. And so again, go to my website and you can contact me. Now I'd like to read a little bit from the beginning of the book, just kind of give you a sense of what it's like. So this is the very beginning. February 10th. Dear Vincent James Capello, hi, I'm Vivian Jane Cohen, VJC, just like you. That's a sign of connection between us, isn't it? I think so, but I don't go by VJ like you do. People just call me Vivi. Well, that's not really important. The really important thing is this. I want to be a knuckleball pitcher when I grow up, just like you. My mom says that's impossible because there's never been a girl in the major leagues. Still, someone has to be first, right? And I'd like it to be me. I don't know if it's actually possible, but my brother Nate says I throw a wicked knuckleball. He's on the varsity team as a catcher, even though he's only a freshman in high school. That's really impressive, don't you think? So if Nate says my knuckleball is good, then it must be at least a little bit true. The problem is, I've never pitched in a real game. I don't play for a team, and I don't know if I ever will. But that's not a very happy subject to write about, and I want this letter to be happy. So now I'm going to talk to you about something else. I bet you're wondering why I'm writing to you, out of all the bajillions of people in the world. Well, besides your general awesomeness, we actually know each other. Sort of. I met you 3 years ago, when you were still pitching in the minors. You probably don't remember, but for me, well, it was the most important day ever. Here's what happened. My family and I went to a California Tornadoes game for this social thingy with the Autism Foundation. I didn't like the game. Loud and boring, which means not for me. The seat felt so sticky against my skin. I bounced up and down, even though Mom kept telling me, sit still, Vivi. Then we went into the clubhouse to meet the players. You weren't like the others. They talked to us in loud voices, which was pretty stupid because being autistic doesn't mean you can't hear anything. They use that funny voice as teachers do sometimes, the one that needs to explain things very slowly. Not you. You saw me wandering around to the back corner, came up to me with a big smile on your face. You tried talking to me, but I don't talk to strangers. I fought very, very hard against the urge to run. I wanted so much to get back to my own room, away from all the strangers and their big voices and stinky armpits. That's when you pulled out a baseball and showed me your knuckleball grip, 4 fingers clenched into a fist. The knuckleball is a very special pitch, you said. It completely defies the laws of physics because it doesn't spin in the air like other pitches. Try it. I didn't understand much about physics and stuff, but I liked the idea of throwing a super special pitch. Except I didn't think it would be a very good idea to throw a baseball with all those people right there. Now? I asked. You laughed. Not in the clubhouse, but when you get home, will you give it a try? Yes, I said. You smiled. I think you'll like it. When I went home that night, I tried throwing the knuckleball for real. The first 2 pitches bounced into the grass. Then the 3rd pitch sailed right over the backyard fence, so I lost the ball forever. Nate got really mad at me because I borrowed it from him without asking. Oops. After that, I asked Mom and Dad for my very own baseball. Even though it was hard, I knew I wanted to learn the pitch that defies the laws of physics. Your pitch. Every day since then, I've practiced throwing the knuckleball. I'm not sure how many days that is, but it must be an awful lot. I can also throw a 2-seam fastball, though it isn't exactly fast. But I guess no one says they throw a 2-seam, sort of, but not really fastball, even if it is closer to the truth. I wish so much I could pitch for a real team. Like in that movie where girls played baseball because all the boys were off fighting in World War II and stuff. But all that happened a really long time ago. In real life, girls don't play baseball, especially not autistic ones. I've asked about it 1,000,003 times, but Mom keeps saying I should play softball instead. No matter how many times I explain everything to her, she doesn't understand that it's harder to throw a knuckleball with a great big softball. And if I can't throw the knuckleball, I don't want to play. I'm writing to you because I need to write a letter to someone for my social skills group, and I chose you. My dad says it's okay. He's a big fan of yours too. To be completely honest, I don't understand the point of this assignment because everyone in the whole world uses email. Duh. But when I mentioned this fact to Sandra, the counselor who runs the group, she just let out a sound that sounded very not nice to my ears. Just do what you're told, Vivi, she said. Adults sure like saying that, don't they? And I want to be good, so I am doing what I'm told, even though I don't entirely understand why I'm doing it. Oh, sorry. You're probably not very interested in Sandra, since you're super famous pitcher and all. I mean, you've been an all-star twice, plus you won the Cy Young Award. You probably don't have time to read letters from 11-year-old girls at all. But I wanted to try anyway. It took a really long time for me to find an address on the official team website. Someone should fix that, in my opinion. But I did find it. Now I'm sending you a letter. Since we've met before, we're not strangers. Also, pitchers and catchers report to spring training today, and I wanted to wish you good luck. Not that you, of all people, need luck, of course, but I figured you're probably pretty down after what happened in the World Series last year. That must have been really hard. I know what it's like to mess things up. I wanted to tell you that even after what happened, you still have lots of fans like me who are rooting for you. My dad says it's our year, and I think he's right. Sincerely, Vivian Jane Cohen, also known as Vivi. P.S. Do you know why the knuckleball is called a knuckleball when you don't actually use your knuckles to throw it? Wouldn't it make more sense to call it a fingertip ball? So that's the first letter that introduces the character. As you might have seen, that is the book takes place in 2020, but it's actually an alternate version of 2020 in which baseball exists. So if you're missing baseball like I am, it might kind of get you back into that, kind of what you love about the game in that way. And I also, I know I'm almost out of time, but if books about kind of neurodiversity and autistic kids interest you, I wanted to put in a plug for my book that's coming next year, The Many Mysteries of the Finkel Family, which is for fans of the Panderwicks and the Vanderbeekers. It's about oh, I see Jessica has her Dodgers cap. I'm a Yankee fan, I know, but so, okay, I see, go Cubs. Okay, we have teams well represented here. So my book, the next book is for fans of the Penderwicks and Vanderbeekers, but it's with 2 sisters who are both Jewish and autistic, and that kind of shapes their family dynamics in a way that I really found interesting to write. And so now I think I have a few minutes left. I don't know, but I'm happy to answer any questions quickly.
We have a couple of minutes left with you. I'm fascinated with the book because when I was younger, I actually sent letters to Major League Baseball players, and I sent baseball cards for them to sign and return. And so that's very fascinating. And the whole thing, you know, with knuckleballs and pitchers, I was going to ask you about your baseball. You know, you're like a girl playing baseball. Like, do you have some sports background? Was it research?
Not as a player. I mean, I played a bit of softball as a kid. I'm really bad at sports. I did like playing softball non-competitively, but mostly playing sports are not my thing. But I do, as you might have gathered, I love watching baseball. I've been a fan for most of my life. I was named after my great grandfather, who was a big baseball fan, a big Yankee fan. And it's just been part of my life for so long. And so just writing this book just kind of came naturally to me. It was partly inspired by the TV show Pitch, which it has a kind of a woman pitcher as the main character. When I saw not even just the show, which I still haven't finished because I'm sad that it's over, but when I saw the previews for that, as a woman baseball fan, I was just so moved that it's just like, I was surprised that I had such an emotional reaction to seeing a woman on the pitcher's mound. And I think that sort of planted the seeds for the book in some ways.
Yes. And do you have a favorite knuckleballer you studied? Like during the research?
I don't have a favorite. I mean, as a Yankee fan, I shouldn't say this, but I've always had a respect for Tim Wakefield. And actually, some of Tim Wakefield's experiences are actually reflected in VJ's characters. Baseball fans probably will notice that. So that was kind of explicitly inspired by him, and also R.A. Dickey. I know there aren't as many knuckleballers around anymore. It's kind of a lost art, which is sad to me.
Yes, it's tough. Well, there's not much time, but if anybody had one question, and also just remember that Sarah said that, because, she's involved in her community with autism, and very, I'm sure her community is very thankful for that, but she said she'd love to share with you about that on a Zoom sometime. So make sure that you get her information. I know it's on the chat, her website, and contact her if you want to try to do something like that. One last chance for someone to ask a question before we go. Okay. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for being here today. Kyle, will you show her her slide again?
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you for being here so much. So make sure, and Lexanne from Dallas said that this Vivi Cohen is going to be in a lot of those new schools too. And so there it is, 8 through 12 years old, 3rd through 7th grade. Make sure you get that in your library when you get back to school. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, everybody. First of all, I'm so glad y'all are all here for this exciting Penguin Young Readers Night. Our next guest author is Keir Graff. He is from Chicago. He has been described at one point in his life as the hardest working man in publishing, and I can't wait to hear a little bit about that if we have time today. His newest book is Tiny Mansion, which comes out this fall, and then he has 2 other books. Plus, he's been writing for adults. In fact, one of his books, I noticed, One Nation Under God, has an Oklahoma-based character in it. So can't wait to hear more about his books. Keir Graff, welcome to Oklahoma.
Thank you so much, Ken. I'm glad to be there virtually. My wife has family in Miami, Oklahoma. I haven't been for quite a while, but that's a beautiful part of the state. And welcome to my office here in Chicago. Walking distance from Wrigley Field, I will say. We were talking, with Kyle and Ken before we got started today about, how much our lives have changed or not changed since, the COVID-19 crisis started. And, I had to say that, really things have just not changed that much for me because I spend most of my time in this little tiny room. And if I move my head, I think you can see the bars on the window that keep me from making an escape. So it's, the thing that I miss the most, of course, is getting out to schools and being with kids to share my middle grade books with them. So I'm very happy to be with you today to tell you a little bit about them. I'm going to start by sharing my screen here. I am not, and let's see if this works. There we go. So I am not an educator. I come from a family of educators though. So I thought I would do my best to channel that and hopefully kind of look at my books a little bit through that point of view and hopefully talk a little bit about how you can kind of use them in the classroom as educators. My father was a high school teacher. My mom was an elementary school teacher who worked for many years in what they then called the resource room. I have an aunt who's a university professor, and my grandmother became a grade school librarian in her 50s. She went back to school after all her kids were out of the house. She went back to school and got her library degree and had a short but very meaningful career as a school librarian. And that's something that has just inspired me forever. So I chose this opening slide because my books are all about adventure. If asked to describe my books kind of as a whole, at least my three most recent middle grade books, I would say that they are funny, fantastical adventures with realistic characters and heart. I try to connect with the characters really emotionally. I try to write intelligent stories, but they are adventures. That's the kind of book that I loved reading growing up. Books where a lot of stuff happened. Books where I could escape a little bit. And certainly my characters have issues to work through from time to time, like all kids do. But I also really want my books to be able to provide a refuge and an escape for kids who just maybe need to get away from things a little bit. That was certainly what made me start turning pages when I was a kid. My three most recent middle grades published with Putnam are set in unique and memorable homes. I'll touch briefly on that for each one, but that comes from my own love of, I love house tours. I love visiting unusual residences. I love architecture tours. My wife is an architect and I've learned so much from her. And here in Chicago, we have an abundance of fascinating places to visit. One of my favorite times of the year is the weekend called Open House Chicago, where unusual buildings and homes open their doors to the public and you get to snoop inside. And as a writer, I'm kind of inventing places that I can snoop inside, I guess. And certainly these are middle grade books. Middle grade is a wide range because of course we know that kids read at different levels. One third grader might read at a higher level than a sixth grader. So of course it's all about the kid and what they're ready to read. But when I think about my real sweet spot for my audience, I think of fourth and fifth grade. The Matchstick Castle, my first book, might be a little younger, maybe a little more fourth than some third graders. My two most recent books might be just a little older, but I still really think of fourth and fifth as my sweet spot. So I have to briefly explain this because I can't stop using this caricature provided by Ada Caban, who's one of my favorite artists. She was kind enough to draw a caricature of me, but here you see me with my quarantine beard. So I had to provide the photograph that she used as a reference, so you can at least see that at one point, and perhaps again in the future, I will resemble that. So the Matchstick Castle, which is sort of the first of my kind of home and building themed books, it's set in a town called Boring, Illinois. Kids always get a kick out of that. And it's a made up town in downstate Illinois. And he is sent to live there with his uncle Gary after his father, who's an astronomer, gets pulled away to a real life adventure. His father gets to go use the telescope at the South Pole. And Brian wants to go, but of course he can't. So Brian is sent to live with this uncle who, instead of having all sorts of fun planned for the summer, wants Brian and his cousin Nora to spend their summer indoors on laptops, basically using educational software. And when I wrote this book, I definitely didn't have the coronavirus and the shutdown in mind, but it feels weirdly timely all of a sudden. Brian is a kid who loves being outdoors, and he he's very active. He loves sports, he loves soccer, and he just can't believe that he is now sentenced to spend time indoors using this educational software. And it's called Summer's Cool, and a really bad pun. And so he thinks he's in for the worst summer ever until he escapes to the woods. Basically, accidentally, he kicks a soccer ball over the fence, gets lost in the woods, and he and his cousin Nora discover this crazy, ramshackle, dangerously dilapidated old wooden building that's just massive. And it's called the Matchstick Castle, and it's home to a boy named Cosmo Van Dash and his family of forgotten adventurers. And summer suddenly gets a lot more interesting at that point. And the themes in this book, the things that people could kind of talk about, certainly, again, this is a fun, silly adventure, but there's always something to talk about in any piece of literature. And here I think there's a lot of problem solving involved. And Brian and Nora discovered that the Matchstick Castle is threatened by a dastardly bureaucrat who, of course, wants to tear the thing down. And so their mission becomes to help the Van Dash family save the Matchstick Castle. So there's some problem solving involved. There's some daring real life rescues right in the house itself. And And there's definitely a strong theme of questioning authority. What do you, is it okay to go against the rules if you think the rules are wrong? There's a lot of things you can talk about there. And as I said, there's definitely some stuff you can talk about. And come next fall, teachers and students are going to have a lot of real life data they can use to compare the difference between learning online and using a screen to learn something versus doing it hands-on and in real life. So I think those are some interesting topics that could be generated by this book. I'm not going to go through all these discussion questions and suggested classroom activities, but I just wanted to say that if anybody wants these slides, feel free to email me. My email address will be on the last slide. I'll be happy to send these to you if you find them interesting to look at or useful in any way. Now, my next book after The Matchstick Castle is a book called The Phantom Tower, and it is a story about ghosts, an ancient curse, parallel dimensions, people who aren't what they appear to be, and what happens to the people we love after they die. And if that sounds too heavy, it's also about twin brothers who can't stop hitting each other. It is an adventure book. It's got a fantastic element. It's got ghosts. It's the only book I've written I've got fantastical elements in my different books, but this is probably the closest to an actual fantasy. Half of it takes place kind of in the real world, and half of it takes place in a tower that is like a ghostly twin to the tower that my main characters live in. So Colm and Mal McShane are identical twins. They're 12 years old. They move with their mom from Dallas, Texas to Chicago, Illinois. Their family's having a rough time. Their father has died not too long ago, and their mom has moved to Chicago to take a new job and hoping that things will get better for their family and they'll have a fresh start. Things aren't that great at first. Things are kind of weird. Their new building is creepy and half empty, and it's full of these eccentric old people who tell them not to explore the building. And of course, that's the one thing they want to do. And so they meet a girl named Tamika who lives in the building. And with her, they begin to explore some of the building's strange mysteries, including the fact that it has a 13th floor that only appears for an hour a day. And through the 13th floor, they access this phantom twin. The building itself has a phantom twin. And there's a curse on the building. It says that right on the cover of the book. Once you move in, you can never move out. So this book has been described as being like Hotel California meets The Shining, but for kids. And I think that's a reasonably decent description. It's much more silly than it is spooky, for sure. But so once they discover the curse, they have to unravel the mystery of the curse. And the book was inspired by the building I'm currently sitting in, because we moved into this old 1930 Chicago building and discovered that it had a lot of eccentricities and a lot of eccentric residents. And when I go to schools and talk about it, I explain how all the real life weird things about my building inspired this made up novel. And the kids just are absolutely fascinated, especially by the fact that there was a real life princess in this building when we moved in. So themes of this book include certainly sibling rivalry, mysteries of history, and ultimately it's a book about Mal and Colm dealing with grief and learning to come to terms with their father's death. And it's very much interlaced with their supernatural journey, and it raises some weighty questions. And hopefully people have been pretty positive about this, but hopefully I've struck the right balance between the kind of zany adventure and then the real emotional journey for these kids. And again, I'm just going to skip past this slide, but there are all sorts of fun things you can do with it, including researching triskaidekaphobia, which is the fear of the number 13, which is why old buildings don't have a 13th floor, and which ties directly into this story. And then my forthcoming book, The Tiny Mansion, is kind of another summer story. A girl named Dagmar comes from a family that's very hand to mouth in the Bay Area in California, in Oakland, California. And her father's a handyman who kind of goes from job to job, and he invests a lot of resources in a job of building a tiny house for a client. And kids just are fascinated by tiny houses. I mean, I think we all are. There are all these TV shows streaming on Netflix about tiny houses. And so her dad builds a tiny house for a client who then refuses to pay. And all the family's money is tied up in this job. And so they suffer a big reversal of fortune, and they're forced to leave their apartment and move into the tiny house. And they find themselves squatting illegally in a beautiful redwood forest in Northern California. And so here's Dagmar, 12 years old. She's growing like a weed. She's achy and clumsy and just feels like a stranger in her own body. And now she's crammed into this little tiny house with her family and her mom, her dad and her stepmom and her half brother. And she just thinks her summer can't get any worse. And then she meets the mean kid who lives next door. It turns out they've camped their tiny house next to basically a private forest that is home to a reclusive tech billionaire and his really awful son, Blake. And so summer gets really complicated. And so there's definitely a lot of stuff to talk about in this book. I mean, there's the challenges facing blended families. There's separation from friends, which is something all kids can relate to at some point. New friendships and navigating those. And then there's also, it's not too heavy-handed, but I definitely worked in a theme of poverty and income inequality here, because Dagmar's family they're creative and they're very interesting people, but they just don't have a lot of resources. And suddenly they are confronted with this family that just has unlimited resources. And those are very real differences. And so somehow she has to kind of navigate a friendship in these terms. And let's just say her new friend Blake's house, her new frenemy's house is nothing like a tiny house. It's a high-tech, smart mansion. So lots to talk about with that. The climax of the book takes place during a raging wildfire, something I wrote before Northern California was devastated by the Camp Fire and some other fires, and just felt feels like there's a lot of resonance. Oh, somebody's mic right there. So I think there's a lot of resonance and a lot of things that people can talk about in that regard. Basically the last 60, 70 pages of the book, Dagmar and Blake have to help their family flee from the wildfire. So it sounded like from the chat, like maybe classes are already getting out in Oklahoma. So I don't know if that's the case, but right now I'm offering free Q&As via Zoom or Skype or whatever to classes that are in lockdown and doing remote learning. I'm happy to spend 15, 20 minutes taking questions from young authors, talking about my books or the writing process, or giving them feedback on their writing or anything. I think it's important to maintain those connections. So please feel free to hit me up on those. And here's how you get in touch with me. It's very easy to find me. KierGraff.com is my website. There's information about school visits there and all my books for adults and kids. My email is just kier@kiergraff.com, and all my social media feeds are KierGraff. So I'm very easy to find. So that's my nutshell presentation for my 3 books. I think I might have a couple of minutes. If there are any questions, I'd love to answer them. If not, I could read the first page of the book or whatever.
Well, in the chat, Kyle and I were talking about how you wrote that one book for us, or about us, because we can't stop. We couldn't stop. Even today, we kind of hit each other sometimes.
Yeah, I'm not a twin, but I have an older brother that looks a lot like me, and it was a nonstop slugfest. So I could relate to that.
Yes, and everybody was impressed that you pronounced Miami right. And so to ask if you've been to Oklahoma, I figure that's a no-brainer. You've probably been to Oklahoma, right? Especially, did you come to Oklahoma to research One Nation Under God?
No, it was a family visit. The location for that book was chosen for a complex number of reasons, but it was not a research trip. It was just visiting wife's family there. Okay. My wife's father was born and raised in Oklahoma, and her grandparents had a farm, and so they've got some pretty deep roots out there.
Okay. And people also, you write under the name as a duo, I think, Linda Kier, is that right?
That's right. With my writing partner, Linda Jaffe Hull, who has written a number of mysteries, like cozy mysteries and women's fiction and stuff. We've written 3 books together. The 3rd one is coming out this fall, and it's contemporary. It's very not for kids, but it's very much, I think, for the people who are attending this. You know, it's really, we write relationship fiction, like primarily novels about marriages and some of the various challenges that married couples face.
Awesome. Okay, we have just another minute or so. Does anyone have a question or a comment about Keir Graff's books? I know several people were saying how they have to put them on their wish list. They sound perfect for 4th and 5th grade.
Glad to hear that.
Dagmar is an unusual name. Is there a cultural connection to that name?
That's a great question. Actually, that was so my wife and I are fans of unusual names. As you may have noticed, I have a bit of an unusual name myself. My parents were named Tom and Nancy, and they determined that their sons would have a little more unusual names than that. And my wife and I named our sons Felix and Cosmo. And I collect interesting names, kind of. I have a notebook and I'm always scribbling interesting names. I just love unusual names. And when my wife and I were going through baby names before we became parents, we didn't know the gender that our kids would be. And so we were just writing down lists of names that we loved. And Dagmar was a total shortlist name for a girl if we had one. So it was just a name that I have. It's not a family name or there's no particular significance behind it. I just think it sounds kind of like old world, you know, European glamour or something like that.
Okay. Well, this has been a real pleasure getting to know Keir Graff. Again, you know all of his information. You can email him and he'll send you the PowerPoint information. He'll Skype with your kiddos, or not Skype, but you know what I mean, Zoom with your kiddos about things. And he was credited with bringing book lists to the digital age. That'd be interesting. You might ask him about that one too. So thank you. It's been an honor for you to be here too. And Keir Graff, thank you.
Thank you so much. My pleasure to be here.
What a great evening. This is so great. Can't wait to start putting these books on people's lists, because y'all let me pick them out sometimes, which is pretty awesome. I'm just going to put all of their stuff in. Okay. So this seems way too weird that, everything has been selected, because this next book I'm very excited about, because I love stand-up comedy. And our next guest is Jessica Kim. And I believe this is her first novel, Stand-Up Yummy Chung. I hope I pronounced that right.
Yumi.
Oh, thank you.
You and me, yes.
Okay, that was one thing I didn't check pronunciation before we started today. Anyway, her book came out in March, right about the time we all started this crazy time. And we're looking forward to hearing about Yumi Chung. Jessica Kim, welcome.
Hey, thank you. I'm so glad to be here in your living rooms. Before we begin, I just found out there's this cool function on Zoom, which makes me feel a little less alone. But if everyone could just go down to the reactions bar at the bottom, you see there's a little happy face there. Can everyone just give me a thumbs up or an applause there? Yeah, okay. It makes me feel a little bit less like I'm talking into the void. I'm in this like white room with I don't know if you're listening or you're not, or you care. So it really helps if something jives with you or you're interested in something, just give me a thumbs up or a clap so I know that we're connecting. So thanks for having me, Brown Brothers. Thanks, Sheila, for putting us together. Like Kenneth said, I'm Jessica Kim. This is my new book. It came out a month ago. Oh, is it 2 months ago now? Oh my, it is. And it's called Stand Up Yumi Chung. And it's about an 11-year-old girl. And she's really shy and she's really awkward and she's having a very difficult time making friends at her fancy private school. So the fun thing about Yumi, as you can tell from the cover, is she is obsessed with comedy. So she's one of those kids who watches YouTube, and she has this little notebook where she writes all her little jokes, and she dreams one day of performing them. But the problem is her parents, her Korean immigrant parents, they don't get it. They think it's weird. They totally think it's a waste of time. And so they're always encouraging her to stop with the jokes and to study for that big test she has coming up. So their business is a Korean barbecue restaurant in Koreatown, Los Angeles. And unfortunately, it's not doing so well. Things are happening with gentrification, and they're losing a lot of customers. And so it's been kind of tough for them lately. And so they really need Yumi to ace this exam that's going to get her a scholarship so that she can continue going to this prestigious private school. So things get real interesting one day when Yumi stumbles into this brand new comedy club that just showed up on her neighborhood. And she walks in and she hears none other than the voice of her YouTube idol, who she's been like religiously following forever. And she kind of peeks her little face in the window there, and she goes inside just to kind of get a glimpse of her, you know, her idol. And she gets mistaken for a camper. It turns out that this her idol Jasmine Jasper is teaching a comedy camp, a summer camp in this place right next door to the library where she's supposed to be studying, and she mistakes her for an absent camper named Kei Nakamura. And so she's too like awkward and uncomfortable and doesn't know how to correct her, and so she accidentally kind of falls into this double life, and she doesn't know what to do, but she can't stop either because it's the first time she's ever felt alive and accepted, and her jokes are landing, and she doesn't need to be this like scared Yumi character anymore. Now she's Kei. She's this new persona. And so she ends up going back to the comedy club day after day in this new persona, living this double life. You know, her parents think that she's at the library, but she's really carrying on as this secret person. And the stakes get a little higher when she finds out that there's this new school. It's a performing arts school, and she's made friends, and she has this whole life that she's dreamed of, and all she has to do is convince her parents to send her to this new school. So it's a really fast-paced story with a lot of hijinks, a lot of jokes, a lot of laughs, but underneath it all, like the underbelly, it's really a family story. And it's a story about finding your voice. And it's a story about being comfortable in your own skin. And it's one that's been on my heart for many, many years. So I'm really excited that it's finally a book. Oh my gosh, look at it. It's a book, everybody. And I'm so excited to bring it to you today. We worked really hard on it because I have like a certain reader in mind. And my reader is not always like a reader, meaning they don't like go buy hardcover books when they're newly released. Like, so I really am kind of targeting my reluctant readers, my readers that maybe have never seen themselves in a book before. Maybe this book will really relate to kids who are like me, born in the United States, but have parents from a different culture and constantly having to shift in and out of two worlds. So that's kind of my love song to those kids. Like I said, I've got reluctant readers on my mind. So I got the big old font here. I mean, it looks a little fat, but it's not because I've got her journal entries with her little doodles, and you can see her little spiral here, and it's all written in her handwriting. We've got emails and different things to kind of break up the text because, you know, nobody wants to read a big old boring book with just words, right? Or at least the kids these days. They need a lot more with all the stimulation they have with the way they consume media. So I really wanted to hit my readers where they are. I'm a former teacher. I used to teach 3rd grade, 4th grade, and 5th grade. I'm a mother of a tween. So a lot of these voices are very fresh. And one could say, you know, everyone has kind of like their natural age, like their real age internally. I think I am an 11-year-old trapped in a 39-year-old's body. So like plenty of fart jokes and a lot of like puberty jokes and things. But I have to tell you, my favorite thing ever is when readers tell me that I made them cry. It's the best. It's like a funny book, but there's lots of like heartfelt moments, especially as Yumi, who's a 2nd-generation Korean American like myself, is kind of coming to understand her parents and where they're coming from. And I think in the beginning, she's really like, why can't my parents just be normal? Why can't they just support me in my comedy? But kind of as she goes through this journey, and as she kind of gets to know her parents and what they're feeling and thinking, and where they come from, their lived experiences as immigrants, I think it's a very interesting journey in self-acceptance, and where she comes to accept both parts of who she is as a Korean American, and sees her parents' love through a different lens. And I think that was kind of one of the most gratifying parts of writing this. But back to what I was saying. Sorry, I'm like all over the place. As a former educator, I feel like this book is really like timely. They're going through things that I never went through when I was in middle school. My daughter, she's 10 years old, she's in 4th grade. And I don't know if it's social media, I don't know what it is, but I feel like kids these days are like so much more afraid to take a chance, to take a risk. I guess when we were coming up, we could just act a fool and no one would know. But now if you act a fool, there's like screenshots and it's being posted all over, and you'll never live it down. And it's like a different era. And I feel like there's this sense that you really want to fit in. I mean, that's always been there, but maybe exacerbated now, where they just are kind of not as comfortable in their own skin and not afraid to make mistakes. Or I'm sorry, they are much more afraid to make mistakes. And I really wanted to kind of send that message through the story, through Yumi, that, you know, just as she learns in her comedy, it's a process. We're all learning. We mess up sometimes. That's okay. You're just getting a little bit closer and, you know, learning how to pivot when things aren't going right. Those are kind of the messages that are in this book. So it's a fun book. I'm from LA. I live in San Diego now, but I lived in Koreatown for a number of years when I was a school teacher, a public school teacher in California. So it's going to have a lot of those West Coast vibes. Gosh, what else do I have to say about this book? Yeah, it's a big old piece of my heart. I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to tell this story. So I hope you enjoy it. And yeah, I hope you check it out. I do have a bunch of resources on my website as well. I am Jess Kim Writes is my handle across the board. So you can find me on Twitter. I really love Instagram. So I'm an elder millennial. So I do a lot of my stuff on Insta. And my website includes discussion questions and all kinds of fun activities. And I love to like post kids fan art on my Instagram and stuff. So like I've been getting those and it's been a lot of fun. So I'm really crossing my fingers for the day that the libraries open up again and the kids can discover my book. And I'm just so eager to meet them and share a little bit of the story with them. So that's my spiel. I'm not gonna read from it, but because there's a much more talented person than I who has already done it. Her name is Greta Jung and she did my audiobook. And if you go on my website, you can just click the video and you can hear her read chapter 1. And that way I get to spend more time with you guys and hear your questions and tell you a little, whatever you want to know about this debut novel of mine that came out during the coronavirus. Yay. So I'll open it up to whatever questions. I don't know, Brown Brothers, if you want to ask me to get it started, if we're shy, we could do that.
Well, if anybody wants to jump in real quick, anybody with questions about Yumi and her experiences? Yes.
I have a question for Jess. First of all, thank you. That was really great. Do you let your daughter read your work? Did you let her read your manuscript while you were working on it and ask for feedback?
Oh, she definitely read the final book. And, you know, of course, she's my biggest fan. She's so cute. So she book talks it. She made a book report on it before it was published. So she's like my PR manager. Yeah, no, so she's read it. I definitely like sit in the next room and wait for her to laugh or like wait for her to, you know, to see if it's hitting all the right notes and stuff. But not so much in the writing of it. She was a lot younger when I started it. She was probably closer to 7 or 8 when I was in the drafting of it. So yeah, it's great to have a little tester living right under your roof. So
Jessica, you're so energetic. Do you have other stories bouncing around that you're working on?
I do, Janet. I am writing a friendship breakup story right now because I remember being 11 and that was probably the most like traumatic thing, right? Is like this friendship that you thought would be BFF, like, you know, And I'm writing about how kids, what's the word? Sorry, I lost my thought. I'm writing about how I really want kids to know that it's okay for people to go in different directions. You know, my daughter had some friendship things going on, and I think, you know, we're so inundated in this culture with like Buzz Lightyear and Woody, you know, forever, best friends forever. And it's like such a thing, you know, and we kind of hold it up on a pedestal. And it seems really silly to ask an 11-year-old to be best friends forever, you know, with somebody, you know, sometimes that's not really life. Sometimes you move on and go in different directions. And I think we need more stories like that. And so I'm working on one right now, also featuring a Korean American girl named Sunny Bang, and she and her friend are going through it in middle school. And they're, yeah, it's gonna be a heartbreak. I hope to make you cry again. So.
Go away, Ginger. Go away.
We're gonna get that fixed real quick. Good, thanks, Kyle. Okay, any other questions real quick? We still have about 6 minutes with Jessica. Very excited to hear.
Is the new one aimed for the same age group?
Yeah, I really love this group right now. This sits comfortably 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, and even 7th graders have read it and really liked it. And so it's been really fun to see like who's connecting with it. I just Zoomed with a bunch of like 6 boys, 12-year-old boys who read it, and they were super into it. I really didn't have much in the way of requests for my book, but I was a little bit of a diva about like, I really don't want it to be pink and sparkly. Like, this is a book for every child. Like, please don't brand it that way. Like, I need a Korean girl on it, and I need it to be for everybody. And they did awesome job, wouldn't you say? I'm so happy with what Penguin did with it. Yeah, I hope to hit that range. It is, like I said, readable in terms of type and length and density. It's very colloquial and very current in terms of dialogue. So I think it works for a great range, but because it has kind of like those themes of like, those heavier themes with the parents and understanding where they're coming from, I feel like even older kids could appreciate it, because that's something that like kind of never goes away, right? There's a scene in here that I wrote, and I think it may be my favorite scene, and it's that scene, you know, like after kind of the bottom falls out and Yumi gets caught for all her lies, and she has to kind of reconcile with her parents, and things are not going well at the restaurant. And there's this wonderful scene. Well, I think it's wonderful. I hope you think it's wonderful too, but where they're in the back of the restaurant in the alleyway, and Yumi is throwing out the trash to kind of help out. And she smells cigarette smoke. And she sees her father sitting in an upturned milk crate, smoking a cigarette. And at first she thinks he's like laughing because he's kind of doing this weird shoulder shake thing. And she realized that he's crying, that he's sobbing, he's weeping. And it's the first time she's ever seen her father cry. And I think there's something about that age when you're about 11 or 12, when you kind of realize like mom and dad are human, like they're not perfect. Like I think up until then we can idolize our parents, right? And then right around adolescence, the world opens up and your parents are not the heroes you thought they were, and they let you down, or they don't know what they're doing. And I think that's that moment. And so they have this lovely exchange where the dad reveals, and I won't spoiler alert it for those of you who haven't read, but he reveals some of his deferred dreams, some of the things he wasn't able to do because of, you know, circumstances with his immigration. And so in a way, Yumi learns that her dad does understand her in a way that she never would have known before. And they have like this frank conversation where she's talking about her passion for comedy, and he's kind of explaining why he thinks the way he thinks. And yeah, that one has a lot of emotional resonance for me. That's the one that a lot of people mentioned to me as the one that made the scene that made them cry. And since this is my debut novel, I was able to bring a little bit of my life into this book. I lost my father much earlier than Yumi. My father passed away when I was 6 years old. We ran a small produce store about an hour outside of Los Angeles, and he passed away of pancreatic cancer rather quickly, as many of you know. Pancreatic cancer is a quick one, and I don't have that many memories of him. But I do have the memory, even as a young child, 5 or 6 year old child, of my father smoking a cigarette outside the store when he was feeling stressed, because he was a business owner. It was very difficult during those years. And I was so glad to be able to include that in this book, in this moment with Yumi, and having the conversations I wish I could have had with him. So yeah, the scenes like that make me think that, yeah, some of my biggest fans are over 40 years old, you know, like there's something for everyone, whether you're in it for the hijinks and comedy as a 4th grader, or whether you're reading it for a little piece of yourself that wants to be healed with the reconciliation of your identities. But yeah, honestly, it's been kind of a weird silver lining, this Corona thing, because I've been told that kids are finishing in one sitting. And as much as that kills me, because it took me 2 years to write this book, but the fact that they have time to read, sit there and read and get lost in a story. I know for a fact my daughters, they're softball players. There's no way they could have sat down and read for 3 or 4 hours in a book. And then the fact that their parents have nothing to do and they're reading it too, and they're telling me how much they loved it. And so I'm so shocked by the breadth of people that have connected with Yumi. So yeah, that's a very long answer to your question. But yes, 3rd and 4th, all the way to, you know, whatever age will find something in this book for them. Are there any other questions? Oh, Ken, there you are.
Okay. Now, we're pretty much out of time, but I had one question. You know, my brother Kyle is a middle child, and I saw on your website that you are too.
I am.
Do you have insight into how I might, you know, we might work on our relationship?
You need to be so much nicer to Kyle. Like, you don't understand Kyle and the things that Kyle has gone through. It is so difficult to be a middle child. There's a book in there somewhere. I'm gonna write a middle child book.
If you only knew.
If you only knew. Kenneth, you have no idea.
Yes, as Kyle will tell you, and Kyle, go ahead. When was our sister born?
I was just 1 week away from turning 1 when my sister was born. So.
Oh, well, you got shafted. Yeah.
Pushed aside, but that's another. I think most of these people have already heard about that.
But he's a real sweetheart, and you know, and anyway, so we love middle children.
Yes.
Is Yumi a middle child?
Yumi is a younger child. She has an older sister who is 10 years older than her, and she's perfect and annoying.
Well, thank you.
Perfectly
so much. Penguin is sending us 2 arcs for stand-up Yumi Chung. They're not really doing many arcs these days because of all the different weird reasons, but they are sending me 2. So
awesome.
3/17, March 17th. Put it down there on the chat if you want to claim yours, the 2 people closest. And then going back to Kier, I forgot we had one. His book birthday coming up is September 8th. So make sure that if you have a birthday really close to September 8th, put it in the chat and we will do that. And I think that's all. Again, Jessica, Kim, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yumi Chung. It came out right before the quarantines all started, and make sure you get it in your library. And I think that's it. Congratulations on your success. Multiple starred rewards and everything. Okay. We're almost through. We have a very exciting, our last but not least, we have Lauren Wolk, who has written a book called Wolf Hollow, which won the Newbery Honor. You might have heard about it. And she's a best-selling author. She also wrote Beyond the Bright Sea, which won the Scott Odell Award for historical fiction. She also, her newest book that came out in April is called Echo Mountain, which already has multiple starred reviews. She lives in Cape Cod, and we are just so excited to have Lauren Wolk with us here today. Welcome, Lauren. Welcome to Oklahoma.
Thank you very much for having me. I've never actually been to Oklahoma before, but I hope to rectify that. I just want to say first, I am a middle child, and I want all your sympathy for that. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Kyle, Kenneth, and Sheila for having me. This has been delightful. Yes, I've written Wolf Hollow, which Wolf Hollow, there's a little bit of backstory to that. I wrote a book for adults when I was a baby. I was about 30, and it was published by Random House, and it got some good reviews and all, but you know, it didn't really do very much. And After a while, I wrote another book, which didn't get published for adults. It was probably the best thing I'll ever write, but you know, that's how it goes sometimes. And a little while longer went by, and I was teaching and I was raising children and doing various other things. And so I kept writing because I love to write, but I began to lose the hope that I might, you know, be published again because my editor had died and I had to start fresh. And I decided, you know, I'm just going to write a book that I care about. I'm going to write a story to honor my mother, her childhood growing up on a farm in Western Pennsylvania, the stories that she told me when I was a child growing up, the time that I spent on that farm, my grandparents and uncles, the whole thing, my family history, my family that was so dear to me. And so I wrote Wolf Hollow just because I wanted to honor them. And without trying to think too much about whether I might ever share it with a broader audience. And of course, that's when things happened. I sent it to my agent at the time, a man from New York, and he said, well, okay, this is going to go somewhere, but I think it's for young readers. And you know, after I fell out of my chair, I said, well, no, I write for adults. And he said, why would you think that this has a young protagonist? It's a coming of age story. And I said, well, it's not that I don't want it to be for young people. It's just not my world. I haven't thought about it. It required a paradigm shift. And while I was struggling a little bit with that, he said, think back to when you were 12 or 13. Think of the books you read when you were a kid. Think of the difference those books made in your life, how they changed you forever, how they live in your bones to this day. Do you not want to be perhaps to children what, or do you not want your books to be for children today what those books were for you? And I said, well, of course. I can't imagine a better outcome, a dream I'd rather have fulfilled. And I got very excited about the possibilities. And then he said, but I don't represent books for young readers, and so I can't do this with you. And I began to cry because publishing is such a long and difficult road at the best of times. But he said, I'm sorry, I just wouldn't know what to do with it. So I found a new agent, a wonderful woman who knew what to do with Wolf Hollow. And I haven't looked back. Middle grade fiction seems to be what I was meant to do all along. I just didn't know it. I've had a wonderful time with that audience. But like some of the other authors here today, I really feel like I write for a reader, you know, not necessarily for any age group, but coming of age stories, you know, naturally are for middle grade readers. I do get invited to a lot of book groups with octogenarians though, and everything in between. So I love the fact that I'll get a letter from someone saying, I got this book and I read it first. I'm 70 and I read it first before giving it to my granddaughter. Then I passed it down to my daughter and she read it. Then she passed it down to my granddaughter and she read it. And we sit at the kitchen table and we talk about these things. Nothing compares to stories like that. The idea that generations are talking about these stories is just incredible to me. So Wolf Hollow was my introduction to a wonderful world of readers. And I feel incredibly blessed that something I wrote from the heart has ended up touching the hearts of other people. So that was really a tribute to my family. Beyond the Bright Sea, which I actually finished before Wolf Hollow was published, I wrote, as I did with Wolf Hollow, inspired by setting. I always start with the place, always start with the place. A place I know well, a place where I want to spend time as I write, a place where I want to engage my readers, bring them to that world with me. So Wolf Hollow was the family farm. Beyond the Bright Sea was the Atlantic Ocean around the Cape where I live, and the Elizabeth Islands, which are a little string of islands off Woods Hole in Massachusetts. Beautiful, beautiful islands. And then Echo Mountain, my new one, is set in Maine during the Great Depression. I go glamping in Maine. My mother has land on a mountainside in the Sumner area. Has anyone here been to Maine? It's sort of west central Maine, yeah. So if you like mountains, you know, Maine's a good place to be. When we go camping there, we do have a little camp with a door that shuts and a roof over our heads, but there's no electricity or running water. It's very primitive. although primitive is kind of a negative word. It's very basic. It's simple. It's you're immersed in the natural world there, which I love. So that inspired Echo Mountain. Once I have my setting established, I add a person who usually rises in my imagination from who knows where. And then I never want to know what's going to happen in the book until it does. Just follow the character through her life, no plan. Dr. Rose said, writing a novel is a lot like driving a car at night. You can't see past your headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way. That's how I feel about writing. I know many authors do as well. That way I get to have the adventure along with my protagonist. I get to laugh when she laughs and cry when she cries. I get to be in her skin. Because I write in the first person, I know only what she knows, but I really, really know what she knows. I understand the world as she does. So for me, creating 3 girls, 3 protagonists, Annabelle in Wolf Hollow, Crow in Beyond the Bright Sea, and now Ellie in Echo Mountain, they've shown me the world in new ways, and they've become my daughters. I have sons. I do not have daughters of my own, except I do. I have 3 so far, and I hope to have more. Plot, as I said, is the least important thing about my books, but they've tended to have some pretty interesting, mysterious little elements to them, which baffles me. I'm not sure where the story comes from. It's just something that unravels as I go, and then when I'm finished, I go back and, tweak it and develop things that I like best about it. I rely on 2 universal languages to build bridges between me and my readers. One is the senses. I try very hard to write books that are filled with sensory imagery so that my readers can meet me halfway across the bridge, and we share that common language of how things taste and smell and sound and look and feel. And the emotions, the other universal language that we all share, always will, that we all know what it is to be sad and happy and angry and frustrated and scared. So those 2 universal languages are at the core of everything I do. I rely on the natural world as much as possible because I feel most myself in nature. And I think even people who live in cities can be invigorated and inspired by the natural world. And so why do I write historical fiction? I don't know. I think I was born old. I've always loved old things. I think I probably have been here before, and I really belong about 200 years ago. That's it. I don't get it, except that when I was about 4, I started going antiquing with my mother, and I just felt so at home among old things. So I look back. I look back a lot. And as I'm writing these books, I'm looking back to a time before I was born. So of course I do research as much as I need to answer my own questions, basically. So Echo Mountain, yeah, during the Depression, of course I wasn't there then, despite how I may look. I wasn't born for a couple of decades after that. And I do see parallels between what people went through then and what they're going through now. Of course, I finished this book long before the pandemic. But I think that time and this time both, and many times in between, and times we're still going to encounter, ask us to be resilient and self-reliant and innovative and brave, and to care deeply about each other and to spend time looking after each other. And that's what Ellie does. She and her family have to leave the town where they've always lived in Maine and move into the wilderness to start a new life because they've lost everything. And although her sister and mother don't take to this new life, and although they're all cold and hungry and scared and very, very poor, Ellie and her father and her little brother Samuel, to an extent, are kindled. They're invigorated by this wilderness. They see great possibility in a fresh start. They want to learn how to learn. They want to be capable, especially Ellie. She just wants to help and be good at things. And so in this wilderness, she finds her best self. And she also meets a hag named Kate and a boy named Larkin. And she discovers that she has a healer inside of her, that she is meant to be a healer of things physical and things emotional and the problems that plague her family. I'll just read the first couple of pages so you hear her voice. And I'll tell you also before I do that my first lines always come to me in the shower, and they come out of, well, the influence of water and music are always important to me, but the shower is a great place for first lines. And this one just came to me as I was washing my hair, and it set the tone and really the plot in a lot of ways for the whole book. So who knows what happened there. So chapter 1. The first person I saved was a dog. My mother thought he was dead, but he was too young to die, just born, still wet and glossy, beautiful really, but not breathing. Take him away, she said, sliding him into my cupped hands. Her voice was cold. Perhaps that was why it shook a little, but I knew her better than that. Maisie curved around her 3 living pups as they poked blindly toward her milk, watched me with aching eyes. I could feel how much she hurt too. What should I do with him? I asked. Bury him far beyond the well. My mother turned to tidy the bedding straw. It was as red as Christmas. We'd all had a hard night, but it had been hardest for the last of the pups, the one I held in my hands. I cradled him close against my chest as if I had 2 morning light, past the cabin, toward the well and a grave waiting beyond it. But then I stopped, looked back, and there on the cabin's broad granite step, a wooden pail, brimming with cold water, waiting to be useful. I didn't know what was about to happen, but a little flicker in my chest flamed at the sight of that water, full of green and blue from the tree, the sky overhead, calm, simple. It spoke to me with a voice louder than my mother's as she stood at the door of the woodshed, bloody straw bundled in her arms, and said, "Go on then, Ellie." But I didn't go on then. The flicker, the flame, the voice all tugged me toward the bucket, where I plunged the baby dog deep into the cold, cold water and held him there until I felt him suddenly lurch and struggle. "Ellie, what are you doing?" my mother said, dropping the straw and rushing toward me. But she stopped and stared when I lifted the dripping, squirming pup and pulled him back against my chest. "He's not dead," I said, smiling, "not dead at all," which made my mother smile too for just a moment. "Then he's yours," she said, turning back for the straw. "See that you keep him that way." I didn't know if she meant that I should keep him alive or keep him mine, but I intended to do both. So that's the beginning of Echo Mountain. And the dog turns out to be named Quiet. Don't ask me where that came from either. I don't have dogs, never have had dogs. I grew up with cats. But when I was on the family farm, there was always a dog around, usually a bunch of dogs. They came and they went, and they were the best creatures, true friends. So they seem to find their ways into my books. I have no idea what time it's getting to be, but I'd love to answer questions if anybody has any. I'd love to have a little conversation if that's possible, if anyone would like to.
Certainly. Anyone want to go first before I start?
I don't know if this is a question, but I can hear myself sobbing when I was reading Wolf Hollow. I didn't read it that long ago, but you made the characters so vivid that I can still flash to the pictures of the girl who, I can't remember her name, but the girl, the troublemaker.
Betty.
Yeah. Oh, it was just magnificent. So I appreciate your book. I've been pushing it to the kids every age that I can.
I appreciate that a lot. And, you know, I when it first came out, it was interesting. I got some librarians, and by the way, librarians, I don't know how to thank you or how to tell you what you mean to me. And I don't mean now, although of course now, I mean, when I was a kid, the library was my sanctuary. And the librarians that I knew, and I'm going to cry, were like my mothers. You know, I would go into those libraries and they would see me coming and they'd always have a suggestion for me, and they'd let me just curl up in a corner for hours on end with books, and they'd let me take home a stack bigger than I could carry. And it was just, libraries have a heartbeat that matches my own. So thank you all. But I did get a little pushback from a couple who said, "I think this book is too dark for kids. You know, it's just too dark. there's a lot of heavy stuff in this book. And I said, well, you know, I can't say that, I can't apologize for that. You know, it's true. I thought I was writing a book for adults at the time, but I don't think that would have changed anything as I was writing if I'd known I had a different audience coming. Because life is about darkness. It's about light and darkness. It's about the two in conflict. It's about truth. And especially these days, kids get darkness thrown at them from every direction. And so if it's a dark book, I think there's light in it as well. And I think it's okay to trust kids with serious topics. Of course, I love books that make me laugh. I think those are incredibly important, but I do think there's a place for truth and darkness as well in the library and in people's lives. So thank you.
I have to say, I taught 7th and 8th grade for a while, and for a long time in young adult fiction, there was this really dark dystopian fame. But this was, and I remember my daughter's response at that time, because I was complaining, and she said, Mom, 7th grade is dystopia. So I, for one, really appreciate that there is a book like this that's truth, even if dark. So thank you for writing the book.
Thank you, Carol. Anybody else?
No surprise that you're here, because I still remember around the time Wolf Hollow was either due out or whatever, I was sitting with Sheila and Paul Griffin in the lobby of the Renaissance Hotel, and I must have heard her say 10 times that Wolf Hollow is the book, and if it doesn't win this award and this award and this award, everybody's crazy. So I haven't read it, and I feel bad that I haven't. But I now that I'm hearing people talk about it even more, Sheila, I'm sad that I didn't take your advice. It sounds amazing.
Thank you. Never too late.
Yes.
Anybody else?
It's a beautiful book.
Thank you.
It's a beautiful book.
How do you pronounce your name? Is it Caradeth?
It's Caradeth, yes.
Lovely.
And we'd love to have you come to Central Middle School in Edmond, Oklahoma. We love to host authors, and Sheila has been there a couple of times and brought authors in, and we'd love to have you. What a beautiful book. I don't see darkness in this. I see light and truth and love and nature, and what a beautiful story, relationships. And I share it with our students every year, Book Talk It. We've used book discussions with it. What a beautiful, beautiful story. And thank you for writing it.
Well, thank you very much. And I would love to come and see you. And in the meantime, I too would be happy to Zoom meet or Google Hangout, or I'm learning all these platforms that I never even heard of before. And it's been really rewarding. I was supposed to go on a month-long tour, which of course I didn't do, but I'm getting to do it now virtually. So I'm very happy about that. And of course, I'm glad people are reading. I think the arts in general, books are keeping us all going. So yeah, thank you.
I just want to say I've been listening to all of you today, and I'm always looking for someone for my 5th and 6th graders. And each one of you have touched my heart in a special way that I know that they would just be so excited, and to know that you were on their level. So I'm so appreciative of Kyla and Kenneth and all of you being here. And Penguin, thank you very much.
The kids are a lot smarter and wiser than we give them credit for, although I think that's not true of you because you're librarians and you understand kids. But the questions that they ask are amazing. And I usually turn it around and say, what do you think? And their theories about the characters and their motives and their conflicts are just astoundingly sophisticated and really fantastic. So yeah, the more we can all talk with kids, I think the better.
One of the things I really liked about tonight is, they say that you should never stop reading aloud to kids or whatever. Everybody here are read aloud specialists. They read to their students all the time, but to be able to hear directly from authors tonight from their book, I mean, how great of an experience is that? I hope everybody's enjoyed that part. Thank you for reading for us. Let's see, I just had a couple more. First of all, you are a poet and an artist. Which one of them gives you the most satisfaction, or like, does each one have a different, like a relief or a relaxation or stress? I mean, can you compare the three?
The most relaxing is the artwork because I'm an assemblage artist, which is sculptural, and I use power tools. And there's nothing like a power saw to relieve stress. If you don't have a Dremel, you people out there, go get yourself a Dremel. It's a little handheld device with lots of changeable fixtures on it. I have made many pieces of art with my Dremel, and I have to say that's a real stress reliever. It's like my therapy to go to my workshop and make art. Never thought I was going to be an artist. I was in my 30s before I tried it. Turned out it worked out pretty well. So I've got lovely galleries that carry my work and terrific exhibits and stuff. But and I love writing poetry because I love lyrical language. A good metaphor, boy, oh boy, I'll tell you. Nothing like reading one, nothing like writing one. That's just, I don't care if I sound geeky here, but writing a metaphor is the pinnacle for me. But fiction, writing a novel, because I get to immerse myself in that world for so long. And I'm a fast writer. These are 3-month books mostly, although Echo Mountain took longer because I have a full-time job and doing book work and then writing new books, it gets a little crazy. But even though I'm a fast writer, I'm in there for months. And then the revision process, which is incredibly creative and rewarding, takes months. And I get to be in that world wholeheartedly. It's just like traveling the world and staying at home at the same time. I get to meet new people. I get to have adventures. Writing books is really what I do. It's who I am. And I'm very, very grateful that I get to do this.
And you mentioned you have a full-time job. I know that you are the associate director at the Cultural Center of Cape Cod in South Yarmouth, Massachusetts. Are you still?
I am. Yeah. And we're working full-time from home now. So my days are spent on Zoom meetings, trying to save my nonprofit and advocate for the arts during this time and raise money and work on a new book and revise another one. And so it's a busy time.
You're immersed in a lot of different things. 3 months. I wonder if anybody in the room is jealous about that.
Well, I spent a lot of time thinking about it first before I put a word on paper. So it's kind of like pulling a plug and just all comes out.
Well, I see that Janet from Sequoia Chat is here. Janet, if there was one thing you wanted to say, which I hear you say a lot to authors, the 5 authors that are here, is there anything special that you might say to them?
Well, I think all of us are just so thankful and grateful that you spend your energy, your talents for students, for children, that you think they're worthy of your investment of time, energy, and talent, that you are our rock stars, heroes, because you think that they're worthy. You're building the future because of the way that you invest in their lives. And we just want to thank you for that.
Well, you're our partners because we need bridges between us and our readers. And so, publishers are great. We love Penguin. And we love teachers and we love parents who read to their children and buy books. And we love librarians. I mean, you guys, this is your bread and butter. It's your lives. And so if we have partners, it's because we have you.
In Oklahoma, love y'all, and we've met new people today that we can't wait to put their hands in the books in the kids' hands. We're so thankful that y'all came tonight. We want to thank Penguin Young Readers for setting all this up. Sheila Hennessy, you are a rock star as well. We want to thank Polly Farquhar. We want to thank Sarah Caput. We want to thank Kier Graff. We want to thank Jessica Kim, and we want to thank Lauren Wolf. We just, this has just been such an amazing time. Like I said, Janet is part of Sequoia Chat. The Sequoia Award needs books like these on here. So we're hoping that your books get in the right hands on the Sequoia Committee so they can read them and put them on the list. And we're selfishly hoping we get to work with you again, because once you're on the Sequoia list, you get bugged by us a lot for a video and maybe come to Oklahoma and things like that. So we're just delighted to meet you. This has been such a wonderful night. Is there anything else any of you want to say as you go? We have a couple more minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you for sticking around this whole time. I told them that they didn't have to. I said, you can just come in for your 20 minutes. And they sat here and got to know each other. And learn from each other, and just what a great group. We really enjoyed all of y'all tonight.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And we're going to talk about our schedule for next week. Next Thursday is a big night. Tom Engelberger, Cece Bell, Margaret Peterson Haddix, Ross Burek, and Carter Goodrich. It's going to be a great time Thursday. We're going to start a little early to accommodate one of their schedules. 3:30 will be the start. We do have a Sequoia meeting on Tuesday with our Sequoia nominee, Ashley Yazdani. And then we'll have a Redbud selection committee for the Redbud Award for picture books on Wednesday. And then we're going to take off Friday and Monday of Memorial Day, and we'll pick up on Wednesdays and Fridays after that. Our next Penguin event with Kimberly Brubaker Bradley and others will be on the 27th, I believe. And then I think we're kind of working something out with Chris Grebenstein and some Random House publisher authors on the 29th. So a lot of good ones coming up, and y'all are we're so thankful that you helped show Penguin and these wonderful authors that you could come spend your Friday afternoon. And I know that y'all were all rewarded by that. Thank you so much. Is there, Kyle, anything you want to say before we go?
No, just thanks again. That was amazing. It was such a quick 2 hours, and just for all of our friends that show up, it just means the world to us to see your faces on here. And for all those people we couldn't see your face, we appreciate you guys too, the non-video participants. There we go. Emily's on there now.
And authors, if you know how to save your chat, if you want to see some of the chat that came through while you were speaking, there's a way in the chat. There's that box with the 3 dots. You can click Save Chat, and that'll save to a Zoom file on your computer. So there's been some really fun comments that came through during your talking tonight. So everybody, you know all their contact information. If you're not sure, let us know, and we'll be glad to share it. And we've met some new friends tonight. And I'm going to quit talking. I think, Kyle, are you done too?
Just if we can ever help any of you authors connect with librarians, we would love to do it. If you have a planned trip to come into Oklahoma, or if you're just near Oklahoma and you want to dip down or dip up or something like that, we'd love to have you in here. So
we'll drive you around in the car, and we'll keep you safe, and we'll take you to dinner, and we'll roll out the red carpet when you come here.
Thank you.
Okay, well, Kyle and I normally stick around to talk to some of our library friends, kind of an after party. We'll do that for about 5 or 10 minutes. Thank you all so much. All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Sheila.
Thanks a
Thank you,
million.
Sheila.
Take care, guys. And feel free to put all your librarian friends in touch with me so I can connect them with Edelweiss for ARC, so they can read electronically.
Yes, if y'all aren't on Edelweiss, send me your email address. I'll pass it along to Sheila, unless Sheila put her contact in the. Would you rather me just send you a list?
I will now.
I'll just send you, or okay, whichever. But Edelweiss, you can go in and type in any book, whether it's old or new or coming out soon, and you can see 2 or 3, 4 pages of it. It's a pretty cool resource for when you're shopping. There's information on it. There's notes. It's a really great thing.
And you can also download complete ARCs on Edelweiss. You just have to contact me so I can whitelist you and allow you to download. So as in this time when physical ARCs are difficult to get your hands on or will be going away entirely, maybe Edelweiss is the way to go. So just pop me an email and I will set you up.
There's a question, does Penguin do anything with NetGalley?
Yes, we do indeed. Yeah. I'm not familiar with NetGalley really, but I know we do. So yeah, feel free. Okay, I'll sign off and let you guys talk. Thank you. Take care, everyone.
So
Bye.
Jessica's still here.
Jessica, I loved your energy. Oh my goodness, that was amazing. Oh, yeah, she's muted.
And I can't.
Thank you.
I am so excited about your book. I actually, I went on and I've already checked out the audiobook. And so I just can't wait. And I'll probably, when I find a book that I absolutely love after I start it, then I actually go into Audible, because then I'm like, my wife, I want her to read it too. So I can't, I'm sure
how fun.
listen to it as well. So
I think it's my teacher itch from when I was in the classroom. It's been about 10 years now that I've been since I've been teaching, and so whenever I have any kind of space like that, I just
It was great. I mean, everybody here, was that not amazing? Her energy. I mean, it was just like, it was great.
Yeah, we got to get her to Oklahoma to visit our schools.
Yeah.
Oh, I'd love to come. I've never been. I would love to come.
I wanted to compare notes with your stand-up comedians. Are there any stand-up comedians that you've seen out there that you've gone to live that you really liked?
Yeah, actually, as soon as I don't know how familiar you are with the author side of things, but once you complete a manuscript, you have to query it out to literary agents, and it's always like a really stressful thing. So what